Okay, so the next two slides are a bit dry. I'm going to talk about specifications because if I don't talk about specifications, you really won't understand what's necessary to get a quality instrument that will record seismic data that you can actually use for research. And we spent a lot of time on this, and so I want to take you through it so you understand what these instruments are. First of all, the instruments have to be serviceable by hosts, people who would actually agree to host the instrument. If we put out 5,500 instruments, we're going to need an army of technicians to go out and fix these things. The batteries die after 3 years. It's just not going to happen. So what we want are the hosts of instruments to actually repair them, or not repair them, but at least replace the batteries or swap out the units for us if we tell them that they're malfunctioning. In terms of functionality, these are triggered instruments. They're not sending home continuous data. They're not going to fill up the bandwidth on their internet. They're just going to occasionally send home a seismogram. And we require that the data format be mini-seed. This is the lingua franca of the waveform community. Most of the manufacturers of instruments have their own proprietary format. We have to then integrate to that format to be able to use it. It's a challenging thing for us. We're trying to break that model. Just give us something in a language we all understand. It has to have a week of data on the instrument in buffer, on a memory buffer at 200 samples per second. The idea here is if an earthquake occurs and we lose connectivity on the instrument, we want to be able to go back into that buffer and be able to get data. It's Linux. It's actually a micro version of Linux for low power, but we wanted to be able to install algorithms like an early warning algorithm if we feel comfortable that this is an area in which we want to go. So what happens is every hour you can configure it, it'll send home a state of health message in XML. And that tells us its battery and its, I'll show you an example in a moment. It also, when it checks in, it says, do you want me to reconfigure myself? Do you want me to go back into this week of data? Did I miss something? We can tell it to recover data that it missed. We can have it run Unix scripts. We can have it update its whole operating system, Linux operating system, and the firmware. It uses wireless, but it has the capability for wired Ethernet. And this is going to be in somebody's house, maybe in your house, so we can't talk to it because it's behind a firewall. So what it does is it initiates the connection to the server, and it also knows about alternate servers. So if one of them is down, it will go find another one. It uses, has a password in it, so it's secure data. Plugs into the wall, household. It draws only 5 watts. And if there's an earthquake, we're going to lose power. So it has to revert to internal battery. The specs said it has to run for at least an hour to record the main shock, but in fact, the test showed that it'll run for 36 hours. If the battery runs down, it'll go into sleep mode, but when it senses AC powers back, it'll reboot. Of course, it has 3 accelerometers. 3G clipping, which is, if you're not familiar with this field, that's pretty high. Every time we record a big earthquake, it seems like, oh, now we've seen 4G, but 3G is, from what we've seen, is pretty close to the maximum, hopefully. The sensors have to be linear for those people that like this kind of information, and this is the frequency range over which is flat. We want it to recover if it does clip within 10 seconds. So if you've ever looked at a broadband instrument like a Streckheisen, and they can clip on earthquakes as small as magnitude 4.5 in the near field. Because these are feedback sensors, a Streckheisen can take about a minute, 100 seconds for that feedback logic to settle down. We don't want that. We want it to recover very quickly. This digitizer capability speaks to the question of how sensitive, what's the dynamic range? Do we need to really spend a lot of money recording noise? 200 samples per second, timing. If we go to you and we say, would you be willing to install this instrument? You'd probably, we're hoping a lot of people will say yes, but we are concerned that they might not be interested if we say, oh, and by the way, we want to drill a 1-inch hole through your wall and run a cable out through your roof and then clamps an antenna on your roof to get GPS timing. So the instruments have something called NTP, or Network Timing Protocol, which a lot of your computers have it, you probably don't know. They go out over the web, they find a server that knows what time it is, a precise server like Apple Corporation, for example, and it says, okay, what time is it? And Apple says it's 3:15, and then your computer says, oh, and it took 1/10 of a second to get that information back, so it just continues to estimate what the time is. Using NTP, you can get to about 20 milliseconds accuracy, which is, we think, is sufficient for strong motion recording. If we lose the internet, then we lose timing. We don't want it to drift very much. All the samples have to be taken on the 3 sensors simultaneously. We don't want the digitizer to be any noisier than the sensor. And then lastly, here's these are standard things for when it triggers, short-term, long-term average, some absolute level, configure for how long it triggers. We want it to, if it loses the internet, it won't be able to upload its data, so we want it to be able to store those triggers indefinitely until the internet comes back. And then when it sees the internet, it says, oh, I got all these files, and it uploads them. If it continues filling up its memory, it will overwrite the smaller amplitude events, and also then create a short message with the peak ground motions for shake map. So that's what the specifications